Before we get going, I just want to add a note about the ad hoc mod pack that I'm using. I had decided to use the small ships mod. It's one that I had briefly considered before, but all the information I had found at that time showed these beautifully detailed models that were ridiculously small, and I had no interest in that. However, as I was scanning YouTube for new mod videos, as one does, I found a more recent look at the small ships mod and decided to load it into one of my sampler worlds to check it out firsthand, and I was very happy with the current state of the mod. In fact, I'm so impressed that I want to add it to this world, so I am. I recommend that you take a look yourself, but in the end you need to do whatever floats your own boat, so to speak. Aside from that, we're ready to start actual work in the game world. Now, as I had mentioned in previous episodes, I build my bases mostly underground, and I build from the surface to the bedrock layer. There is a method to my madness, and to understand it, it might be necessary to explain how I got to this point. When I first started playing Minecraft a decade ago, it took me less than 5 minutes to figure out that digging into the side of a hill was a quick and very viable way to survive the first night in the game. Thereafter, it was an easy jump to the idea that digging out additional space was a great way to expand the base and still keep it secure. As I kept playing, it began to dawn on me that the more you dig out, the more valuable stuff you find, such as iron, gold, redstone, and of course diamonds. And in fact, the deeper you dig, the more frequently you find these goodies. So that's what first drew me down to the bottom of the game world to search for more of the good stuff. Once I got down there, I made a discovery. I had found that while the oceans are deep, they aren't that deep. And once I was digging around at the bedrock level, I could, and actually did, dig under the oceans. So this solved another problem I had run into. Because after you get settled, you invariably find saddles, and then you get yourself a horse, and even the slowest horse is generally better than running around on foot. Unfortunately, moving a horse across water, especially large bodies of water, is a pain in the butt. However, if one digs a tunnel under an ocean, then moving horses between landmasses is pretty simple and easy. Thereafter, that became a key part of my base designs, a central pillar reaching down to the bedrock, and once I was down there, I built a long-distance tunnel network that I call a metro. Now, I usually rigged it with minecarts, but if you find a good horse, you can travel faster than the minecart, and so I would often ride my horse through the tunnels instead. But to get a horse from the surface to the bedrock, or vice versa, required some thought and effort. So I would build a wide and high stairwell that would allow a rider to easily move up and down, though this sometimes led to vertigo when I would wind up or down the stairs at Mach 12 of a particularly fast horse. That was the state of things for a few years until they introduced bamboo scaffolding, which was a bit of a game changer for me as a builder, and I soon realized that putting a central column of bamboo scaffolding in the center of the access shaft could act very much like an elevator. So my design evolved to include the scaffolding column with the stairway coiling around it like a helix. The stairway remained a part of my design because my early experiments to utilize this design for mounted players was a bit of a disaster. To move down, you need to crouch, but the crouch key is also used to dismount. Therefore, instead of moving down with scaffolding, I would jump off my horse. Now, there's no way to separate the dismount functionality from the crouch functionality, so I had to keep the stairs in the mix in order to support mounted players. Of course, the value of this design shifted a little when the second part of the Caves and Cliffs update was released. At that point, there was still value in digging deeper and deeper down, but it had been reduced a little as coal, copper, and iron were generally most available at higher layers. However, the advantages of an under-ocean transportation system are still great enough to keep the general design, even with the current state of Minecraft. But all of that was with vanilla Minecraft. Now I'm playing modded Minecraft, and this obviously complicates things a bit. Now, with the Create mod, I could potentially build a working elevator that can be used by those who are mounted or on foot. And if the elevator only made a few stops, then I would probably go that route. However, there will be many stops, and so designing an interface and control system that allowed you to skip multiple stops or go directly to a given level is a bit more involved than I want to deal with at this time. In fact, the current base design includes 20 levels. There are 3 planned for above ground and 17 planned for underground, and so I definitely wanted to explore other options. I eventually settled on the moving elevators mod as the preferred solution. The mechanics are simplified, but using their displays and control mechanisms allows a much more elegant and practical approach when dealing with 20 separate stops. However, there's a slight hitch with using the moving elevators mod, in that the hardware for each stop uses a fair bit of iron, and if you multiply that out by 20, it's clear that I'll need a bunch of iron to implement this. So the completion of the central shaft will require 2 phases. The first is the excavation of the shaft itself and building a rudimentary ladder or scaffolding to provide access to each level. The second phase will be to replace that with an actual working elevator once I've gathered enough iron for the job. Now this episode will only cover the first phase of that work. Besides the actual excavation of the shaft, there are 2 other things we'll be doing this time around. The first is the completion of the shaft shell, and the second is the completion of the vertical backbone of the storage and logistics network that will fit inside the shell with the elevator. Both of these bring their own caveats. Starting with the shell itself, it'll be constructed entirely or at least mostly with deep slate blocks of some type. Now you may have noticed that I'm running with a resource pack, and specifically I run with the Lithos 32X pack. Now I've been running with it off and on for quite a long while. When Deep Slate was introduced, I absolutely fell in love with how the various Deep Slate blocks looked in Lithos, and so I now prefer to use Lithos all the time, and I use Deep Slate as the primary stone type in my bases. Though I usually fall back to traditional stone for almost all other building, including the stuff I build in other dimensions. For the record, I absolutely hate how Deep Slate looks in vanilla Minecraft. As for the storage and logistics backbone, I'm using the storage drawers mod, and through the use of trim blocks and controllers, I can set up a storage network that stretches to every corner of the base. Actually, due to the size of the base, especially the tall vertical footprint, I'll need at least 2, if not 3 separate storage networks. But I'll integrate them in such a way that the whole shebang will look, feel, and act like a single network. However, since the network will run across all levels of the base, I'll need to run these trim lines vertically, and there'll be space in the central shell to do that, so that things will work well and still look good. So let's get to work. Now at this point, I'm digging the initial shaft, and it's just a single shaft of 1 block width and length with a ladder in it. And I'm cutting out doorways at the elevation of each level to act as a guide and gateway for each. Now yes, I'm technically digging straight down, and that is one of the cardinal sins of Minecraft that most people learn the hard way within their first hour in the game. However, I'm not digging straight down on blocks that I'm actually standing on. Instead, I'm on a ladder hanging over the blocks I'm digging on. Now this does slow down the speed with which I'm able to dig, but it allows me to go straight down without suddenly pulling the ground out from underneath me and falling into something unpleasant or even deadly. Though I would generally consider death unpleasant. Now, this exercise sets a template from which to build and also serves as a bit of an exploration or reconnaissance for what I'm getting myself into. This particular run's been extremely surprising for me, as I haven't hit water or lava. Now, I did nick a very small cave, but otherwise I've not hit any major open spaces. And this is particularly surprising, as I found a cave mouth a little short ways west of here that seemed to lead to a very deep and vast cave system, which I fully expected to run into with the shaft. And in fact, I found very little dirt or even gravel until the very end here. So the only real downside is that apparently the very bottom of my base is in the deep, dark underground biome. And therefore, at some point, I'll be trying to lay track and run trains right through the middle of prime warden habitat. Lovely. However, for now, the next step will be to climb all the way back to the top and then dig out the full shaft downward. Leaving materials to support the central ladder and some on which to walk at each of the planned levels. Now obviously I'm going to accumulate a lot of material in this stage, which is why I built so much storage up front. Now that's a long ways to fall, and it doesn't quite go as high as it eventually will. However, it's more than sufficient for now. Now at this point, it's time to start building the shell through which the elevator car will travel. Now since stone is a renewable resource and deep slate isn't, I'll use stone bricks for foundational layers and structures, and then face that with variations of deep slate. For thinner walls and structures, I'll just have to use deep slate. I'm building a safety net with materials included from the supplementaries mod. This will prevent my death should I fall through the openings at each level, and it should give me a much quicker way to come down from the surface until such time that we have an elevator car. At this point, I'm laying out the template that'll be used throughout the access shaft, and it'll serve as the inspiration or theme for all the other interior spaces. Now normally I would build the shell with plain bricks, and then as I excavate around the shaft, I would replace those plain bricks with some kind of design that utilizes different materials, textures, and thicknesses to come up with a more unique and visually interesting design. However, this time around I pretty much knew what I wanted to do, so I'm placing the desired blocks in the first place to achieve the design from the very beginning. And then when we excavate the spaces around the access shaft, we'll reveal the completed walls with the new design already in place. As I started building upward, I realized that I'll have to just leave space for the storage and logistics system and continue with actually installing it in this first pass. Now this is because the primary and secondary controllers used in storage drawers require redstone comparators, and those require quartz, which comes from the nether. Now as I'm not quite ready for that, I'll open an access channel for them and leave it open until I've accumulated the necessary materials. For this reason, and the need for rose quartz for the create mod, I will probably venture out into the nether sooner than I normally would prefer, maybe even next episode. One of the mods I'm running is called Mineral Chance, and all it does is enable a very small and completely random chance that I might receive a nugget or a gem every time I mine a stone block. And this is stuff that one can find without the mod, and normally the amount of material gained would be negligible. But when you excavate a massive amount of material as I have here, those tiny amounts can soon add up to a considerable sum over time. So even as I found a couple of rich diamond deposits near the bottom of the shaft, it would not normally have been enough to craft a full kit of diamond gear. But through mining the full access shaft, I did find enough diamonds with the Mineral Chance mod to do exactly that. So I feel a bit better about running around the open and the nether. I also took some opportunities here and there to take a break from pure digging and work a bit on the resource farms I established at the surface. So I fleshed out the fields I had started last episode, and I've also started a grove of oaks and birch trees, as well as growing a single giant spruce. Now I've been repeatedly harvesting these, so at this point resources are generally not a problem, though I still need to make some runs through the outside world to look for new resources and materials. And I think that's where we'll head next. Since this whole effort's being played out in survival mode, there's still some materials and resources that I very much need but don't currently have access to. I will grab my shopping bag and go walk about to go find them. And that's quite a lot to pack into a single episode, but I hope you found it interesting. And until next time, take care and cheers.